Let me tell you a story about a man who almost had it all until he made one fatal mistake. His name was Victor Renard, a brilliant but ambitious advisor to the King of Valoria. In a court filled with whispers, schemes, and alliances that shifted like sand, Victor had one advantage. His mind. He could outthink anyone in the room, predict political maneuvers before they happened, and wield words like a weapon. But Victor had a weakness, one he never saw coming. He loved to talk, not in a foolish way, no, Victor was too clever for that. But he believed his intelligence should be heard, his insights admired. When asked a question, he didn't just answer, he explained. When presenting a strategy, he didn't simply share the plan, he revealed the layers of brilliance behind it. And at first, this made him indispensable. The king trusted him, the nobles envied him, and enemies feared him. Until one evening during a royal banquet, he said too much. Set up the poison in his words. It began innocently enough. The king, in a rare moment of camaraderie, leaned in and asked, "Victor, tell me, what do you truly think of my generals?" Victor could have given a simple answer. He could have named a few strengths, deflected with a diplomatic compliment, and moved on. But no, he saw an opportunity to demonstrate his wisdom. So he spoke. He analyzed each general's flaws, detailing their miscalculations, their blind spots, the risks they posed to the kingdom. His words were precise, cutting, irrefutable. The king nodded. Intrigued, the courtiers murmured, eyes darting between Victor and the ruler. Victor saw the king's interest and pressed further, revealing even the king's own errors. Subtle, of course, wrapped in elegant language. He meant no disrespect. He was simply displaying his brilliance, his understanding of power itself. Then, silence. The king set down his goblet. The flickering candlelight cast shadows over his face. "You are wise, Victor," the king finally said, his voice smooth but unreadable. "Perhaps too wise." Victor forced a smile, but in that moment, a chill ran through him. He had spoken for too long. He had revealed too much. And in doing so, he had made himself a threat. He would soon learn the fourth law of power: say less than necessary. Turning point, the invisible trap. Within days, the air in the court changed. Whispers followed Victor wherever he walked. The generals, once wary of him, now despised him. The king's advisors, who had once envied his favor, now saw an opportunity to remove him. And the king, he listened to Victor less and less, until one morning Victor arrived for his usual council, only to find the palace doors closed to him. A single message was sent to his estate, just 3 words: "You talk too much." Victor had spent years crafting his influence, but in one careless evening, he had sealed his fate. Not with a sword, not with betrayal, but with words. And now he was powerless. Victor Renard, once the king's most trusted advisor, had become a ghost. Not in the literal sense, he was still very much alive. But in a kingdom where influence meant survival, being ignored was as good as death. Banished from the palace, stripped of his role, Victor watched from the outskirts of power as his former rivals filled the void he had left behind. At first, he seethed. How could the king discard him so easily? How could words, mere words, undo years of loyalty and strategy? But as weeks passed and his anger cooled, Victor began to see the truth. It wasn't just that he had spoken too much, it was that he had revealed too much. His knowledge, once his greatest weapon, had made others uneasy. His insight, once valued, had become dangerous, and his need to explain, his hunger to showcase his brilliance, had cost him everything. And so for the first time in his life, Victor chose silence. The transformation, a man reborn. Victor spent months in quiet observation. He attended gatherings but rarely spoke. When asked a question, he answered in short, deliberate phrases. At first, people dismissed him, expecting the old Victor, the man who would unravel grand ideas with a flick of his tongue. But when he remained reserved, something curious happened. People leaned in closer. His silence, instead of making him irrelevant, made him mysterious. His restraint, instead of diminishing his influence, made his words more valuable. At court, rumors swirled. Why is Victor so quiet? What does he know? Even the king, who had cast him aside, began to take notice. The demonstration, a lesson in power. One evening, Victor was summoned to a private gathering, an audience with the king. The rulers of neighboring lands were arriving for a diplomatic feast, and tensions ran high. Seated at the long banquet table, Victor listened as ministers debated war strategies, trade negotiations, and alliances. The room filled with voices, each man eager to prove his wisdom. Victor said nothing. Then, at a critical moment, the king turned to him. "Victor," he said, his voice cutting through the noise, "you have been silent all evening." What do you think? The room hushed. All eyes turned to him. Victor took a slow sip of wine, allowing the weight of the silence to settle. Then, in a measured tone, he spoke just a few words. Sharp, concise, yet open-ended enough to suggest depth beyond what was said. The effect was immediate. The courtiers exchanged glances, intrigued. His words carried more power than any long-winded speech. And in that moment, Victor understood something profound. Power does not come from saying more. It comes from saying less, but ensuring that what you do say demands attention. As the feast continued, Victor sat back, speaking only when necessary. The king watched him with renewed interest. The court, once dismissive, now hung on his every word. He had lost everything by speaking too much. But now, by speaking less, he was on the path to reclaiming power. And this time, he would not make the same mistake. Victor had learned the lesson of silence. He had seen how fewer words made him more mysterious, more respected, even feared. But power, true power, is never given freely. It must be tested. And the test was coming. One cold evening, a messenger arrived at Victor's estate. A summons. The king wished to speak with him, alone. Victor dressed in simple but elegant robes and made his way to the palace. As he stepped through the great hall, he felt the weight of the past. This was where he had lost everything. And yet the air was different now. He was no longer the man who had spoken too much. He entered the royal chamber. The king sat by the fire, his face unreadable. On the table before him was a sealed letter. "You have been patient, Victor," the king said. "You have learned restraint. And because of that, I offer you a choice." He slid the letter across the table. "This contains a royal decree," the king continued. "If I sign it, you will be restored as my chief advisor. All you lost will be returned." Victor studied the letter but did not reach for it. "There is a condition," the king said, leaning forward. "I need to know if you have truly changed. So before I sign, I will ask you just one question." The fire crackled. The air grew thick. "Tell me, Victor," the king said softly, "who among my councils still conspires against me?" Victor had the answer. He knew which nobles plotted behind closed doors, which generals had grown too ambitious, which ministers sought to sway the king for their own gain. The old Victor would have answered eagerly, laying out his analysis, proving his value. But now he saw the trap. If he spoke too much, he would make enemies. Again, he would seem too clever. Again, he would show his hand, reveal his power, and remind the king why he had been cast out in the first place. Victor met the king's gaze and let the silence stretch. Then he spoke, slowly, deliberately. "My king, power is a river. It shifts, it flows. Today's conspirators may be tomorrow's allies. But one truth remains. Those who speak too freely of treachery often find themselves accused of it." The king said nothing, only watching him. Victor continued, "If you trust my judgment, then trust this. What I know, I will use when the time is right. But I will not waste words on whispers." A pause. The fire crackled. The tension hung between them. Then, something unexpected. The king smiled. The king took the letter, held it over the flames, and let it burn. "I never planned to sign it," he admitted. "This was never about your position, Victor." Victor remained silent. "I wanted to see if you had learned," the king continued, "if you would fall into the same trap." The last embers of the letter crumbled into ash. The room was quiet. Then the king stood. "Come," he said, "walk with me." Victor followed as they stepped onto the palace balcony overlooking the kingdom. Below, the city glowed with lanterns, its people unaware of the test that had just taken place. "You do not need a title to have power, Victor," the king said. "Not anymore." And then, with a knowing glance, he added, "In fact, true power belongs to those who do not need to speak to hold it." Victor looked out at the city and smiled. He had lost everything because of words, but now with silence he had gained something greater. Not just power, control. The fourth law of power is simple. Say less than necessary. Words can be weapons, but they can also be chains. The more you reveal, the more you give others a way to use your words against you. But when you speak less, when you master restraint, your words carry weight. They create mystery. They force others to wonder, to respect, and to fear what you know but do not say. Victor learned this the hard way. The question is, will you? Subscribe to the channel for masterpiece summaries of masterpiece books. Not interested in useless things.